All right. Here with Joe Petrelli.
But I'm really glad I'm here.
What was it that you wanted to get from the conference, and what is it like the key message that you want to send to people? Derek Evans from AFBI, Agro Food and Biosciences Institute.
So the Azores, where on earth? Some people know where they are, some people don't. So they're basically in the middle of the Atlantic, and they're significant for lots of reasons. They were important in times of war for strategically being positioned where they are. There's lots of weather information gathered from them, which we normally inherit because of the way that the weather comes into us from the Atlantic. So you may be familiar with the name, even though you may not know where they are. Well, that's where they are. And from an eely point of view, they're significant. This is some work that was done by Schmidt, the genius that was Johannes Schmidt in the 1920s. Some fantastic research work, which you're probably aware of, which basically was trying to understand where European eel breed, where the larvae start life, eggs and larvae start life, and actually with various research vessels in the 20s and forward, he basically extrapolated or perhaps interpolated based on the length of the leptocephali, so a life stage of the eel, back to larvae. And the smaller they became, he realized he was closer to where they were spawned. And so based on this groundbreaking at the time work, we have structured our understanding of what it is that European eels need to do in order to complete their life cycle. So some earlier work, which was carried out tracking silver eels into the marine environment, the Iliad project, which is a multi-partner thing, including our friends in CFAS. I think that was around 2008 that kicked off. Really was, again, quite groundbreaking at the time in showing the tracks and the distances that silver eels were covering, and also some of their behavior that they were exhibiting as they were making these migrations. And you can see there on the legend to the left that the markings show whether it was a programmed release or a premature detachment, or whether there was the eel was recaptured or predated. And this became a real bugbear, certainly the predation and sort of losing the tagging or the information into the ether. But very significant was the fact that a single eel managed to get as far as the Azores. And so that's the furthest that eels had been tracked from Europe, going towards the sort of putative spawning grounds, the Sargasso Sea, to get as far as the Azores. And this has always been, I mean, this has always been a tough nut to crack for various technological and biological reasons. But getting the Iliad project, getting an eel, the data from an eel from the Azores is really significant. I mean, it's quite an achievement in itself, but it's quite significant in terms of our project. The project I'm talking about today has developed into something called Eel Trek. And really, we're standing on the shoulders of some of this work that was completed by the Iliad project. And so the Azores. The Azores is an autonomous region of Portugal, and they're an archipelago in the mid-Atlantic. We already know that. And the pretty bit is the islands are characterized by dramatic landscapes, fishing villages, green pastures, and hedgerows of blue hydrangeas. Sounds dreamy, doesn't it? And so we thought it would be a good idea to go to the Azores and see if we could find any eels. And basically, initially we had 3 survey teams of 2 people. And the one I'll be talking about today is my own, which was with Randy Velterop, who at the time was with DEFRA. And we went to the furthest west island called Flores. And you can see the main island there, San Miguel, is where you fly into. So there's actually scheduled flights from Stansted to San Miguel. You can fly straight into Ponta Delgada. From there, you get an internal flight to Flores or any of the other islands. And so Randy and myself were due to go to Flores. It's still 500 and something kilometers away from Ponta Delgada, but this is an advantage because it's the furthest west. It's the nearest to Sargasso Sea. So potentially, if we were to find any good enough eels there, that's where we would launch them from to give them as good a start as possible. And there's something about Flores just to show the kind of weather that it experiences. I mean, summer highs of about 25, and January the lows are about 11. So you know, pretty even all the way through, pretty temperate. Rainfall as you might expect from something in the middle of the Atlantic. You know, a lot in the winter, going down to none in summer, and gradually going up again. So not that dissimilar from our own, and this is important in terms of thinking about silver eel escapement from this archipelago. And really all of this came about because of one person. So Ros Wright, who is also in the National Fisheries team in the Environment Agency, she had a holiday in the Azores. And because of a serendipitous conversation with somebody, a local in the Azores, her brain was sent ticking because she was speaking about eels to the guy, and he said, "Oh, we've got eels here." But as far as we could see, there was no scientifically recorded information about any eels on the Azores, whether they were Anguilla anguilla, our European eel, or whether they might have been Rostrata, which is the American eel, or whether the guy was talking about marine eels that were in an estuary or whatever. So it's really because of that initial conversation that all of this has happened. I'm talking about a period in 2017, really, and we did all of this on a shoestring. Since then, it's become better funded. The Eel Trek project has become better funded, and we've got better resources, and there's lots more leaps forward. I'm talking about the early days, really, when we were just finding our way. And so that early project team included Ros and myself and Randy, also Adam Piper from the Institute of Zoology, Matt Gollock from ZSL, and Alan from CFAS, Alan Walker. And really, all we wanted to know initially is, are there eel populations, are they European eels in the Azores, and could we potentially track them from the Azores? If you remember, the Iliad project got us as far as the Azores. We're trying to make that last link from the Azores to the Sargasso Sea. And so initially we kind of did it for the love. We weren't sure that there would be any funding available. So I think we all took annual leave initially and made this trip. It was a bit of an adventure, I have to say, a bit of an expedition, but you know, that was the appeal for me, as well as being part of something which could potentially be really significant in terms of a scientific discovery. And where most people might pack their Speedos and some beach clobber, because we were doing it on a shoestring and flying with a budget airline to get to where we were going, really our suitcases were just full of fishery stuff, so fight nets and other paraphernalia. And this was in December 2017, just the scoping trip. And so you can see that really it was all about trying to establish whether we were catching, if we could catch eels, and when we did catch them, to process them and get some data, which seemed to be lacking wherever you looked. And so it was an interesting proposition to be going somewhere that we didn't know anything about. Certainly I knew nothing about Flores, really. With only some boxer shorts and some t-shirts and some kind of wet weather gear, but not really, in a rucksack, and every other bit of luggage had fisheries management equipment in, including these little trappies. You've seen these probably just for sale on beach fronts, normally for either prawns or crabs. But because they collapse and are lightweight, they were an ideal thing to add into the mix. So we took fight nets and these trappies. And there we are. We've left Stansted. We're in the Azores. So this is in Ponta Delgada, the capital on San Miguel. And that's Roz right there with Randy, and we're just unloading all our paraphernalia, ready to split up and go into our separate teams to look at different islands and monitor different islands. And here we are. So this is the scenery that you see as soon as you're away from the airport. I mean, you know, what a dump. No Mackie D's, no Weatherspoons. No, but clearly it's beautiful, and many places on the island are pristine. It's just a fantastic place to be looking at doing some fisheries research. And this slide is showing on the west coast of Flores. There's a river system here, actually. This is just as myself and Randy in the hire car were heading to our accommodation sort of viewpoint. So you can see river debouching there into the ocean. And here we go. So this counts as quite a long river system in Flores. And then about this point here, you've got just the cliff drop off from the plateau. And yeah, so they're, you know, incredibly steep gradient once it becomes a river system, and very aggressive, spatey sort of systems. And you know, we picked this spot really kind of on a assumption that some of these little tributaries and systems that are so well connected to the Atlantic would have an influx of glass eels and elvers to them, being, you know, they're that much closer to Sargasso than we are here. It's west facing, so, you know, if ever there's a place that giving a freshwater input into the sea there, surely glass eels, elvers will find their way there. So therefore should be adult eel populations, and therefore silver eels. So before we got to Flores, we had done some homework and contacted the Environment Agency, I guess, equivalent on Flores, with a tiny little setup with a few guys, and spoke to them about eels. And they had sort of anecdotal knowledge about eels, and, you know, some yam fields that eels would go out on in a thundery evening and eat the snails off the yams and stuff like that. Lovely little stories, but nothing really that took us any further forward. So, you know, based on looking at the map and Google Earth, we sort of structured where we'd concentrate our efforts, because myself and Randy were only there for 4 days. By the time we were away from home for a week, and by the time you take out the travel times and etc., you really only got 4 days to try and make your mark. So it's important we tried to get the right area of the island. So yeah, it's dramatic, really spatey rivers, and quite challenging, I have to say, just because of the gradient involved in and carrying kit up steep hills. And there is that river I highlighted with the laser, that actually really spatey, big boulders, pretty unfriendly looking in terms of eels and trying to set traps, etc. But we quickly discovered that away from this part of the river system, when you get to towards the face of those cliffs, there are slightly more benign areas to set traps. Well, not a whole lot more, but slightly more. I mentioned our contact with the local, inverted commas, Environment Agency, and this is the main man. Every project in another territory needs a fixer, a local who just knows everything and has got contacts. And this was, for us in Flores, this was him, and it's Lewis, and he was fantastic. His T-shirt there basically says "Guardians of Nature," and that his role incorporates a whole load of things, including some fisheries work, not a great deal, but a lot to do with native flora, a lot to do with some of the rarer species they have on Flores. It's a big birding area. There's lots of migrants that get blown onto this archipelago generally, but Flores in particular. So it's really popular with birdies and birders. And so Lewis, we couldn't have done the project without Lewis. Certainly myself and Randy couldn't have completed our bit on Flores without him. And he was a good chap. As well as the fikes and those trappies, we also took these things which are called Apollos. And one of the benefits of these Apollo traps is that you can completely disassemble them and get them into a suitcase, basically. And they work on exactly the same principle as a fike net, where you've got in scales which lead fish into a trapped end. And the point there, the apex, has got a little holder for bait, so you can put baits in there to attract fish in. And this is not atypical of the jungle we found ourselves in to try and deploy nets. That's Randy forging ahead, carrying fight nets. And these plants surrounding him are this ginger lily, which is this invasive, a horrible invasive plant. It's completely taken over lots of the island, and there's a whole program in trying to eradicate it so that the natural flora can have a chance to come through again. But I have to say it's pretty depressing that everywhere you look there's this great big aggressive plant, and it made everything very difficult to do. Even once it's cut back, the roots are really slippery, and it'd be on the terrain we were traversing, carrying quite heavy weights, it would be really easy to turn an ankle or whatever. So it was just a nightmare with this invasive plant. This is us deploying a fike net in a little outlet from that water body you saw earlier with the waterfalls plunging into it. Again, just to indicate the kind of issues we were having in a simple task of deploying nets. And again, this is really, we have no understanding whether we're going to get eels or not. This might be completely the wrong place, or there just may not be eels or whatever. So it's kind of all on a wing and a prayer. And that's the net deployed under that fallen tree there. You just about make out the open end of it. And this again is just highlighting the issues. This is us trying to deploy one of the Apollo traps into that water body you saw earlier. And this is one of Lewis's helpers, Gilberta, wielding a panga or a machete and chopping down the ginger lily, but it leaves these lovely trip hazards here. So it became a bit of an issue and a challenge to just do, simple setting of nets and Apollos, but we were buoyed up by the fact of being in this completely beautiful area and working with such cool guys. And this is 24 hours later. This is what we found in, I think the trappies that we deployed had these in, and they're brown goldfish, uncolored goldfish, which was a shock to us, to Randy and myself, but I think Lewis thought that they had been released years ago and that they'd formed a bit of a population. It was really depressing in the middle of this lovely, looks unspoilt wilderness to find goldfish swimming about. But there we are. That's life. We didn't catch any eels in that first session either. And here we are at a different system. This is a historical water mill, and the mill leat and river above it, where we were deploying nets. And because we were trying to get as much out of our time there as possible, we would start at dawn and work right through. So this is us just deploying nets at dawn on this water body. And the next day, next dawn, we were rewarded with our first eel. So this is the first eel that we have caught that we are able to say is the first scientifically recorded eel from Flores. So we processed that and took all its morphometrics, etc. And we were overjoyed to catch this animal. Really, it kind of made everything worthwhile. We felt like we were pushing barriers along. Whether we were or not, I don't know, but it felt good at the time that we'd done that. So it was a significant moment for us, and we were able to tell the other guys on the other islands that we'd found that. This is just indicating another spot we tried with the nets. Again, there's probably worse places to be working. Yeah, this isn't an unusual situation either. The pool at the bottom of a waterfall, and if you could scroll upwards, you'd see that there's cliffs, probably 300 meters and higher, carrying on up to the plateau at the top. So the only place that eels could live are these pools at the bottom of the waterfalls, and that's us deploying nets or measuring our catch at that point. This just to indicate there's probably another 100 and something meters of watercourse, and then this looking downstream from the road bridge. So it instantly debouches out into the Atlantic and percolates through the stones of the foreshore there. And so you get an understanding of, I could see how eels would operate in this system. That they would be able to, even I think when the tide wasn't further up, I think glass eels and elvers would be able to find their way through that shingle ridge into the freshwater proper. And similarly, I think you could imagine silver eels escaping, with a big flow in this river and a higher tide, perhaps, that they would barrel out. Maybe not even on a higher tide, with not unlikely that they would just barrel across the beach with enough flow behind them. And there we are, another eel that we'd recorded from that particular pool under the waterfall. This was a bit of a departure, picking Lewis's brain. He said, well, there's a great big water reservoir, well, big by Flores standards, at a place called Santa Cruz. So we motored along to Santa Cruz to see if we could investigate that in terms of eels perhaps being, over the years, landlocked, not being able to get out. And so that's the dam wall of the thing, quite significant. So it's going to stop eel immigration into the thing, but there are other connections to this catchment. And you can see on the right there's a water carrier, an aqueduct, which runs for miles, literally miles in that format. So cast concrete all the way through to a concrete holding tank, which then feeds hydropower. And that's me walking along by the aqueduct, again, fighting our way through to get to this concrete tank, where myself and Randy were fairly hopeful that there might be, a haven for eels where they've gone thus far and can't get any further. And there it is. This is obviously completely artificial, man-made structure. Its purpose is just to be the header for feeding a hydropower turbine at the bottom of the cliff. We could see that there were rainbow trout moving in there. So we set fire. This is interesting. There's a screened outlet which leads to the hydropower feed, but there's also an overflow which is unscreened. And so you could imagine perhaps if silver eels couldn't get out because of the screen on the hydropower exit, maybe they would, with sufficient water, carry on along here. What we didn't know was that thing terminated. And so rather dramatically, this is that concrete container, that header tank. This is the pipework feeding down to the turbine house here, which then debouches into the sea there. And that thing I was just showing you in the previous photograph is here. So the descent for any eel that chose to take that route, I would say, is not a good choice. This is just showing the outlet from the turbine house, or one of the outlets from the turbine house, and goes on into the Atlantic, and some friendly goats eyeing us up. While we were there, we were taking eDNA samples, and you probably know there's different methodologies of doing this. We were using a system of filtering on site the fairly large volumes of water, so that obviously we didn't want to be transporting water samples back, given that we were flying everywhere. And so we opted for this system, which worked out really, really well. and we used a company called Nature Metrics to process these. So you put water sample through them from the body you're interested in, and then you fix them, and then you basically bundle them up and carry them with you. So really neat system, which, you know, this technology is evolving pretty quickly. So probably as recently as 5 years before we went, we wouldn't have been able to do this. So it was great to have it at the time. And one of the reasons we wanted to do this, apart from seeing what other species were available or were present in the water bodies we were sampling, was also to try and see if we were actually capturing American eels or European eels, because again, that's a big unknown. And this was us reuniting after coming back from all our different islands in Ponta Delgada for a meet up before we flew home, and that. But buoyed up by that success, we carried on, and the next year, 2018, we focused. Now that we could see that we had European eels, so the eDNA analysis had shown us that they were European eels, we tried to home in on getting some big silver eels that we could potentially tag, and that happened. So very similar situation. There's my bedroom floor again, strewn with fisheries equipment, with the addition, I'm a Lowrance or a Lowrance fish finder, so fairly low tech or low expense fish finder that we could use to look at some of the bathymetry of some of the features in Flores to better understand where we should set traps. This is that mill I was talking about that we visited in 2017, the historic mill where we were able to catch one of the first eels, document that, and that's just the mill leat and all the little control mechanisms. This originally was used to flood and drain and irrigate yam fields, which are now sort of obsolete, but all the irrigation channels are still there, although very but perfect habitat for eels. That's just discovering where we might set traps for silver eels best, and again, there was no way of automating or getting a vehicle into any of these places, so it literally is carrying great suitcases full of nets and equipment. And there's just a shot of the general terrain. Again, not a bad place to be surveying. And there we are. So this is me trying to make up a specifically, I guess, a specific silver eel trap using fikes. And so we joined, I think Randy had the bright idea of joining two together and creating a big funnel effect, which is exactly what we did. And because it looked a bit like a cone bra, we lovingly called it Lady Gaga. And so this became known as the Gaga or Lady Gaga when we set. And you can see it, how it should fish, and that's exactly how it did fish. It behaved very well, and we didn't have any issues with it. And compared to some of the other traps we set in that area, it was really easy to deploy. And here you can see even the smallest of channels we were putting in a fike net. So that's the hoop of a fike net, literally spanning the width of this irrigation channel. And you know, they went smaller and smaller, the channels, and we set fikes or other traps in each of these, and I don't think there was one that we didn't catch an eel in. We really were, this was a productive area, and it just looked so eely, the habitat and everything, so we weren't surprised to get in there, and we caught quite a few number and good sizes. Even out of the little ones, we caught some really big eels, or relatively big eels for the Azores, Flores. And there's another shot of a fike net shoehorned into the receiving water. And this is exactly what we were waiting for. So we deployed the Lady Gaga and a few other nets, hoping that we'd get some heavy rain to stimulate silver eel migration. And as luck would have it, we did get quite a bit of rain overnight once we put the Gaga out. And as you can see, we had success. This is a silver eel that we caught in the Lady Gaga. And you'll notice straight away. So silver eels really change in terms of their morphology for making that that escapement to the ocean and hence to the Sargasso Sea. And one of those adaptations is these eyes become massive. And so there is a silver eel indexing protocol. And so you can understand how near to being the final item this silver eel is. And a lot of it is based on the ratio of the eye to the head width and other sort of morphometrics you can measure. But this is just to illustrate. I mean, this one is probably as near to being the finished article as you'll see. The eye is absolutely huge compared to the head. Now, you can't necessarily see it from the picture, but it's a really blue silver. It's unmistakable. So this was for us, and that's Randy holding the thing. For us, this was a really significant moment to actually catch a silver eel on Flores, especially in that river system. And these are just more images of that same eel to illustrate, you know, what they look like as properly silver eel. And apart from the great big eye, they're so silver, it's ridiculous. As I said before, they're a really blue silver, very, very beautiful, really incredibly beautiful animals, and completely unmistakable from any other life stage. This was a dabble we had in the impounded water in front of that dam that we looked at in the previous year, just to have a go there because we're expecting more heavy weather coming in and we didn't know what was in that forebay area. And there we are deploying fikes up that dam. We actually caught nothing. We caught a few rainbow trout, no eels at all. So we quickly moved on. And one of the things we wanted to do was the calderas on Flores, which are these very deep lakes which are formed by volcanic activity. Basically, when magma leaves an area, geologically, it slumps down. So it's not where the volcano has erupted, it's the opposite. It's where material has disappeared from underneath and you get a crater forming and that becomes a lake. So there's some significant ones on Flores. To do was to see if there were any eels there. Now they appear to be completely isolated. Some are more isolated than others. This one is completely isolated, and you might think, well, why bother trying to look for eels because there's no connection to the sea. But actually our previous eDNA samples have shown that there were eels in this particular caldera called Caldera rasa. And so we were determined to set some fikes there as well. And again, you can see the ginger lily here, just completely dominating the foreground. And so again, with Lewis's help, we borrowed their little inflatable, and Lewis had a pal who ran a garage, so we were able to borrow the big car battery we needed rather than bring it from Stansted, which would have been a bit of a problem. And so again, really emphasizing we couldn't have done this without help from our Azorean friends. And that's just to show that we were going to use this low rants system to use in a slightly novel way, or it's becoming more widely available, widely used, to look at both the bathymetry and the sort of silt deposition and other elements on the caldera. And this is good news for us. This was just to show that when we went to pull the nets from the caldera, it was tipping down with rain, massive storm, so we couldn't actually do it that day. So the nets were left for 48 hours, not 24 hours, but we were sort of hopeful then that might have stimulated some movement of eels. And my colleague in the same team, National Fisheries Services, Jim Lyons, was very helpful in sorting out this biobase survey. So we used the low rants to form up a biobase survey, and it gives all sorts of extra information. And so this is the kind of report you get from a biobase, and it shows sort of basic bathymetry, but it also shows things like vegetation, and percentage of vegetation, and the bed type, so where the hardness, whether it's bedrock or whether there's some silt coverage, etc., etc. So it's something we've used in the Environment Agency a fair bit for looking at all sorts of water bodies for all sorts of different reasons. It's a really useful tool and very simple to use. So we allied the data from this, relatively novel technology, certainly novel in the Azores and in Flores, with the other relatively novel methodology of collecting eDNA. And so we were really, because it was a kind of, we had no available information, we were trying to be as smart as possible in collecting data to, narrow down the options, given that we had such a limited time to do any trapping and tagging. Basically, in using the low rant, you row backwards and forwards across the caldera. I'm glad to say Randy did this while I was in charge of the biobase stuff, which is good. Poor old Randy, I forget how many kilometers we worked out he'd rowed in order to do this crossing and toing and froing across the caldera, but it was quite significant. And interestingly, when we did the eDNA samples, we could see that it was split 50-50 between carp and eels, roughly. And there we are. We got some fish data showing that's what the fish was. So these will be carp in sort of mid-water and towards the bottom. So it's really interesting. You get a snapshot of what's going on just by using this technology. And that's us deploying a Gaga Mark II. You can see here the open ends of the two fikes joined together, and they're joined together with like a breakaway, just a lightweight ratchet tie, cable tie, so that if there is such a deluge of water suddenly that they can break apart rather than be lost. And we've put a third one up here on this leader, which is kind of the classic way you would deploy fikes in a still water. You often have them in threes like that. So yeah, we left that overnight working, and again we caught eels basically wherever we set traps on the Quent. We caught eels, and this is I'm not going to speak about the data really, that we've got a paper in preparation, but this is just to show a silver eel with a tag on that we released from Flores, a satellite tag there. And it's making its way to the sea, but we have got some great data. So you will have to wait and see. I expect we'll be announcing something along the lines of a paper being released or about the data themselves in the next few months. So keep your ear to the ground. But it was a great project to be involved with.